All right. So first, Excel News Network live stream. Uh, let's get to it. All right. So here's how I'm going to build out these programs. First of all, we're starting it out on Sundays, once a week. Going forward, once I get into more of a rhythm, once we get an actual, viewer group. Right now we have 0 people. Uh, Hopefully, we'll eventually get a few more people. Once we do that, I'm going to start doing it 2 days a week, 3 days a week, and the goal is to do it 5 days a week. Daily show, Excel News Network, hour, like 3, 4 p.m., whatever. So the structure of the show is gonna be top tech stories, a company profile, talking about the larger picture, like a really big picture story, and then a story about some stuff happening outside tech. Then we're gonna do sports, media, and then an editorial by me. Um, all right, so the top story, we're going to be doing 3 stories today. The first one is XAI. Right now we're having like the LLM wars, and this is something that happens whenever you have a new piece of technology come out, right? You have the streaming wars going on. You had um, the smartphone wars, all the way back to the PC wars in the 1970s, right? So right now we have the LLM wars, and to be honest, XAI is kind of a tier 2 player. Like they're not really, they're kind of like Paramount Plus. They're not, OpenAI is like Netflix and like what Gemini might be like, HBO Max, but these guys are clearly, second tier. Maybe Claude is HBO Max, right? Um but hey, they put out these benchmarks for capabilities and reasoning, and they all seem to be doing pretty well. One thing that I think is kind of important about the story is the shift that's happening right now in terms of capabilities. So, one of the big focuses on LLMs up until very recently was the language part of the large language models, right? Like having it be more interactive, having it give, being like someone to talk to. But one thing that people have been noticing for a long time has been that these LLMs, really don't do math. I think, even GPT-3 or GPT-4, GPT-3, someone asked it like 3 times 7, and it was like 15. It just doesn't have that capacity. Even though it's all math, it doesn't know how to do math specifically. So one thing that XAI has been touting is its math scores. But before this stream, I've been doing tests with a lot of the other different models, and at least as it comes to like basic math and arithmetic, they seem to be doing the job pretty well. One of the good things about XAI and the general trend is that is capability to process long context of up to 128,000 tokens within its context window. Basically, like one of the real barriers to having AI, that we have right now, which is basically just like talk to the LLM, into something you can actually like really use as like a tool to help you is its memory. I have tried to build, chatbots, to help me in my particular work, and they're just not. It's just not very useful for that yet because it's hard to like really fine tune the LLM to get it to do the types of things that you want it to, especially with me, where I do a lot of writing. So having a better memory and having it being able to understand its memory a lot better to the point where you can say like, no, change this, change that, and really do subtle differences. That's really gonna be helpful. Like right now, what happens is like with ChatGPT, when try to train it on you know, train it on how to write copy, for instance, which is what I'm trying to get it to do. It'll spit out a certain thing, and then you'll say like, make it more brief, and then it'll just completely change the style, right? So I think that having uh, you know uh, more long context understanding is be critical to getting it to the next step, where it can really be useful and can really train it, in a sophisticated manner. Um, And even though Grok, is probably not going to be the LLM that emerges from the dust, or even like one of the top two or three LLMs, the fact that it's pushing the other ones in this manner, I think is a positive thing. All right, so our second top story, the Palisades nuclear power plant. So the Biden administration will lend $1.5 billion to restart a nuclear power plant in Michigan, the first in the United States. Um, and the big reason why this is important is because, let me see if I included this. Yeah, so if you look at like the number of nuclear power reactors in the United States from 1957 to 2022, like from 1960 to 1990, it just exploded. But then after that, you basically had like a lot of weirdly environmental activists who really fought against nuclear power plants. And what happened is that you have kind of a death by a thousand regulations where um, you know um, they just make these power plants go under so many reviews, you know, go over so many legal hurdles that they're just not able to be built. And it's ironic that it's environmental activists, although it does kind of make sense. And one of the main reasons why is that like one thing that people don't really remember is that global warming only really became a thing in the past like 10, 20 years. Before then, environmental activism wasn't particularly concerned with global warming per se. It was concerned with things like cleaning up rivers, toxicity, oil spills, like those types of things. And in that context, it does kind of make sense why nuclear power was kind of on their shit list. One of the people who led the charge against nuclear power is actually Robert Kennedy Jr., who's now leading presidential candidate. And I do think that that's something that people, kind of, people are kind of supporting him as like a protest to Biden and Trump. But you do have to understand that he kind of has a lot of blood on his hands also, and it is with the nuclear industry in particular. But yeah, so these kind of like old fashioned environmentalists were protesting nuclear power because they believed that it was harmful to the environment. And what ended up happening is we stopped building them. And nuclear power, one in terms of like an environmental impact is incredibly important, right? Like that's like the easiest way to decarbonize because it's abundant, it's cheap, and on top of that, it's zero carbon emissions. Um, but then, like long term, in terms of meeting the world's power needs, as more parts of the world, South America, Africa, and Asia start increasing their power usage, we're going to need more power. And even I think the most optimistic fossil fuel supporters believe that there is a limit. So the federal government was going to provide a $1.5 billion loan. It's a loan, not a grant, to restart a nuclear power plant in Michigan. By the way, I mean, it's kind of clear why Biden's doing this. Like basically, like Michigan for the next 9 months is going to be like the youngest child in a family. Like Biden is just going to give Michigan billions, billions, maybe even trillions of dollars in order to try to win that state. It's the reason why he's pursuing his current policy on Israel. So yeah, like yeah, it's kind of yeah, it's kind of a bad thing, but it's leading to good outcomes. And one of the most important things that I think is coming from this, like one nuclear power plant obviously is not important, but this quote from an engineering professor at University of Southern California: "There's more enthusiasm towards nuclear power in Congress and the industry, and also internationally." And the big issue that nuclear power faces, as Gretchen Whitmer said, is hurdles, inspections, testing, and the blessing of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So the big hope, and the reason why this is kind of a big story, is that hopefully this renewed enthusiasm leads to lowering those regulatory hurdles, so that nuclear power plants can be built without needing a $1.5 billion from the government. They can just be built and operate and provide clean and abundant power to people around the world. Oh, yeah. So here you see this graph where nuclear power generation just like exploded from 1965 to 1990, but then around the late 90s and 2000s kind of tailed off. And this is world nuclear power generation. And again, like as much as power is a domestic market, it's also very much an international market. And if our energy outputs stay the same, energy is going to become more expensive. That's be prohibitive to growth. So if you're a pro accelerationist, I highly recommend being pro nuclear power as well. Anyway, so the third big story is Sam Bankman-Fried. I don't really want to spend too much time on this, but like it is a big story. He got sentenced today to 25 years in jail. One of the big ironies of Sam Bankman-Fried is that since all that happened, there's been a massive rally in Bitcoin. So if he had just held out like 3 months longer, he would have been fine. He would have been a billionaire now. He wouldn't have been behind bars. But that's just kind of how the dice roll sometimes, especially when you're committing massive fraud. Sam Bankman-Fried is somebody who I think kind of divides the tech community a lot, where you kind of have like a pro crypto and anti crypto wings of the tech community. And personally, I've always kind of been on the anti crypto, but recently I've becoming more pro crypto as I've seen the dangers of massive centralizations of authority. I'm starting to become more sympathetic to crypto. That being said, like personally, I just kind of don't want the civil war. I think that the most important thing is fighting against decelerationist. And that leads to Sam Bankman-Fried in particular. This is a Wired story about the death of effective altruism. But then we have a lot of effective altruists, which are kind of, from Sam Bankman-Fried's gang, who are pushing decelerationism in artificial intelligence. So, uh, I think that kind of what we want to see is kind of a break within crypto of like pro EAC and anti EAC people, like pro EAC versus pro EA. And hopefully the pro EAC people, are disgusted by SBF and they, decide to become, pro accelerationism. Anyway, so company profile. I didn't really, to be honest, I didn't really have the time to build this out this week. So I just want to kind of do a quick one. Basically, off of the theme of nuclear power, saying Bankman-Fried basically is saying that the way to power ChatGPT and LLMs is nuclear fusion. And there's a huge amount of money that they're going to start putting into um, regulations to try to push for nuclear power. In fact, this story over here, the AI industry, happened before the nuclear power plant. So who knows? It might even be in, Sam Altman pushing for that led to Biden doing it. I'll say generally, like, a lot of these crypto people, not, no, a lot of, the LLM people are pushing for regulation, and some of them in harmful ways. Like, one thing that we've talked a lot about on the show is that, sorry, that's how my mind's kind of sputtering. I might need to do these a little bit earlier in the day. Um, yeah, so a lot of the AI people have been pushing for regulation as a sort of regulatory capture, specifically Microsoft. I'm going to do a story about this next week. But basically, like Microsoft has been very, very pro-regulation, and Sam Altman is basically a subsidiary of Microsoft at this point. So that's bad, right? But like, there are also good instances of pushing for regulation, and him pushing to kind of deregulate the nuclear power industry so that he can have more cheap energy. I think will end up being a positive thing because it'll end up meaning more cheap and abundant energy for everybody. All right, now want to talk about the larger picture. So I want to do one of these stories every week, just because, like, I think that people can get way too caught up in the headlines and not really remember the general trends that are occurring. And the general trends are really the things that matter, right? Like most of these stories that we're reading about on a day to day basis, like in 10 years and 20 years and 50 years, no one's going to remember them. And they're going to have very little of an actual impact on the world. I mean, I'm trying to pick stories that are high impact, but like if you watch CNN, like most of the stuff they're talking about just like won't matter in 50 years, like at all. And the news neglects these larger picture stories. So I want to like have at least one segment every week or every day when we move to that, where we talk about big picture trends and how they're impacting you. Um, so the one that I want to talk about today is population collapse, and this is like a really troubling trend where this is the world fertility rate since 1960, and as you can see, it's just been collapsing since the 1970s. Um, where like the world fertility was about 5 children for every mother. So like remember you need like 2.1 in order to have replacement level population. And since then it's got all the way down to 2.3. So we're 2.2 away on a fertility rate from not having replacement level fertility of our population of the world starting to decline. And I know that there are a lot of decels who are pro population collapse or pro the shrinking of the population. Um, if any of them want to have an argument about it, like please do, like with me, like I'm willing to come on your podcast or your show or whatever to argue this point. I think we need to have more people. More people is a good thing both in terms of what's it called? Both in terms of economic reasons, where like having more people, building more stuff, that's all great. But then also as a moral thing that like people are good, life is good, and we just need more of it in this world. And then like you see like in the developed world, this is even a bigger trend, right? So like for that I did the U.S., Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and Europe, kind of like the collective West plus Japan. I personally, I consider Japan the West. Like, I know that there are a lot of people who don't. Like, Douglas Murray will say, like, what's the West? You know it when you're in it. When you're in Japan, you don't feel like you're in the West. But like when I'm in Japan, I very much feel like I'm in the West. But anyway, I just include Japan in there. As you can see, like the population collapse has been occurring all around the world has been like incredibly precipitous in the quote unquote Western world, where many countries have been below replacement level population since the 1970s, right? And a few of them, and all of them are below it now, and many of them went below in the mid 2010s, right? So again, this is a hugely troubling trend, again, for like economic reasons, right? Like you just need more people to build more stuff, to fund the retirement state, to fund social services, to fund the entire society in order to keep on building economic growth. We need more people. But then it's also just like, again, like a moral thing. Like humans are good. And I do want to say, like, this is like a weird thing that I get into when I get into arguments with D cells is that so many of them walk around talking about how they want to protect humanity and preserve humanity, but then it seems like they just don't really like humanity because like a lot of them cheer on these trends. Like a lot of them see the population decreasing and are like, "Oh, that's a great thing." It's like, well, if you care so much about humans, like why do you want there to be less of them in the world? By the way, I do have to say that like, to a certain extent, I'm kind of a hypocrite on this because I'm 32, unmarried without kids, but planning on settling down sometime in the near future and adding my bit to the pie. And so I think that one of the reasons why we're having this population collapse is because just a lot of pessimism. So you look around the world, especially in the West, ask the following question: all things considered, do you think the world is getting better or worse? And like these are abysmal numbers of people who think that the world is getting better, and the world is getting better. And actually, like that is one thing that I want to accomplish with this network, with this channel, and with these stories is to tell people about how much better the world is getting. I mean, our first bigger picture story was rather pessimistic, but going forward, a lot of these will be more optimistic stories about how poverty is being decreased, how diseases are being eradicated. Like the world is becoming a fundamentally better place, and I think that it's just a problem of like the news, where like the news focuses on the negativity, right? Like if it bleeds, it leads. But I want us to focus on like what's actually happening, so people have an accurate picture of the world. But one positive thing is that like this is like the same graph, but narrowed down from 2013 to 2021. And sorry for not putting the specific countries. For some reason, the World Bank puts the labels over here instead of putting the labels over here. And so what happens is that you can't actually see the end of the graph, which is the thing that you're most interested in. So I just took the labels off. So I don't really remember which countries, which specifically, but as you can see, like the decline has kind of been leveling off, and at least in like one or two countries, like the fertility rates have been increasing. So hopefully, you know, being optimistic that maybe that this is just a temporary blip and fertility rates are increasing. Maybe that this is just a product of the fact that people are waiting to have kids. So each person has the same amount will end up having the same amount of kids at the end of their life or close to it. But um, because people are waiting until they're 30 versus until they're 20, you have a lot of people with 0 kids who would eventually in the statistic end up having 2 or 3, if that makes sense. So, like, that might be part of the reason why. I mean, hopefully, that's our hope, but, this is a scary trend, and, we should all do our part to try to reverse it. So tonight, you know, get get freaky. I mean, it's Easter, so maybe not tonight. I don't know, but, like, tomorrow maybe. Anyway, so outside tech, just because we don't want to just focus on tech, we want to have some outside stories too. Diddy. Um, so if you haven't been following the story at all, it's kind of crazy, and I think that like there are kind of uh, two levels to the story, right? So basically, like in the past few months, there's just been like a wave of lawsuits against Diddy of ex girlfriends, and then there's this producer Lil Rod who sued him as well. And basically, they're alleging like abusive behavior, a bunch of illegal behavior. And, half of the allegations against Diddy, are kind of like this, the standard, movie star stuff, right? Like you read against some of that, some of the allegations on CNN. It's like, he had him solicit prostitutes, he had him do drugs, he had him, do being sexual encounters. And part of it, you're kind of like watching it, and you're just like, I just kind of assumed that that's what these people did. Like, it would be weird if Diddy, the guy who raps about doing drugs and sleeping with tons of girls, actually comes home as like a family man, right? Like that would actually be that would be the weird thing, right? We're definitely crossed the line, and I don't want to like seem like I'm defending Diddy at all. Is two things. Like, one, there was definitely a tit for tat when it came to advancing someone's career. And by the way, like I'm pointing this out not to absolve Diddy, but more to criticize the coverage that I think has been existing about this case, where like a lot of people like talk about the salacious stuff that occurred, and I think that people, like, as I said, like are at home and are listening and are just like, I don't know, like that doesn't sound, that sounds like what I expected from Diddy. Like, he literally made a movie called Get Him to the Greek where he did all this stuff, right? But like, that being said, like the thing that is troubling and illegal, and that like he definitely should get punished over, is two things. First, he made a very clear tit for tat where he was like, if you do X, I will advance your career, right? If you do these things, and a lot of them were like specific, like having sex with him allegations, then I will advance your career. And that's obviously bad. Um, One thing is, there have been a lot of jokes. Like, if you listen to like Meek Mill, he has like an intro in one of these songs where it's like, I hope the Lord will forgive me of what I did with Diddy. And like, you initially heard it, and you're like, oh, like maybe they did a lot of drugs together. But then you hear it again, and you're like, oh, like what did he do with Diddy? Like did he do some stuff with Diddy to help advance his career? So there's a lot of like questions on Meek Mill too. Anyway, so the second thing, and this is actually the more profound thing that a lot of people are harping on, for good reason, is that it seems that like Diddy was running a blackmail ring, where essentially he would collect this compromising information on people and then use it to blackmail and extort people. And what a lot of people have been claiming, and I don't know the extent to which is true, but I am interested to learn, is the extent to which this is normal behavior in Hollywood. Like, a lot of people are saying that Diddy's just the tip of the iceberg, right? Because like there's Lucian Grange, who was the head of Warner Music Group, and if Diddy was doing this at the behest of Lucian, then that becomes like a much bigger story, and a lot of other people are going to be taken down because of it, because you know I mean, that's just wrong, right? And one thing, there have been some commentators who have been saying that, if you look at the political ideologies and orientations of Hollywood, one of the reasons why they're so lockstep is because of this type of top-down coercion. I don't know if that's true. Like, I think Occam's razor is just that like liberal people are more likely to be in Hollywood, so it makes sense that Hollywood's more liberal. But hey, I'm following this story. I want to see where it leads. And at this point, nothing's really going to surprise me. Personally, I think it'd be really cool if there's just a whole takedown. It seems like Diddy is kind of like, you know, is kind of like the music industry's Jeffrey Epstein, like not pedophilia, at least as far as we know, but a lot of other type of illicit behavior. And if he goes down, there's a question: is he gonna commit suicide, or is he gonna start telling a lot of stories? Based on him, I think he's gonna tell a lot of stories. I think he's gonna want to avoid prison. But yeah, so, sports. A lot of people will find it weird that we're talking about sports on a acceleration network. But there's kind of two reasons about this. The first is that I think it's important, for people in the EAC community to communicate with people outside of our community, and a lot of people outside the community, communicate via sports. Um, and two, I think there's a lot of lessons that you can learn from sports. I think that a lot of people, read a lot of like management textbooks and management books when like you can learn a lot about management and about teams and about building winning organizations from watching sports because you literally have a petri dish happening in front of you, right? You have different organizations, different players, all with similar money and similar talents competing against each other. And certain organizations make certain choices and other organizations make other choices, and they're very public about those choices. And so you can learn what things work and what things don't by following these stories. So, like one thing in particular, like I had this example. I was talking to someone the other day. Is that um, if you one thing a lot of people do is overpay for, hyped up talent, right? So like, with a lot of pedigree, right? So like people from Harvard, and then you find out that the person from Harvard isn't actually that good. Person works for McKinsey, and you find out that the person from McKinsey isn't that good, and you're paying a lot of money, and it's like, how do I get rid of this guy, right? Um, you know, this is a lesson that a lot of people learn the hard way, right? But if you follow sports, you know that you should know this pretty straightforward because like I mean I'm a New York Knicks fan. We paid an arm and a leg for Carmelo Anthony. We got absolutely nothing from it, and that also creates like a visceral pain, that is really productive when it comes to like learning these lessons. So that's why I'm gonna be covering sports. But obviously, always feel free to just skip the parts that you don't like. So yeah, so this game just ended. Manchester City versus Arsenal. They ended up tying, and because of that, Liverpool are going to be at the top of the table for now. It looks like Liverpool had their destiny in their hands in order to win the Premier League. But things can always change. The game was actually a pretty good game, even though it was 0-0. It was very feisty from the beginning. There were a few good chances. Kevin De Bruyne is obviously a genius. Erling Haaland, didn't really do that much, but unless he's scoring, there's not really that much that you want from Erling Haaland. Now, coming up this week, we have the Tokyo Grand Prix. The little more monster. So here are the big stories going into not Tokyo, Suzuka. Here are the big stories. By the way, one of the big stories is I was at this Grand Prix last weekend. This is me. I took this from the they had like a Ferris wheel, so I took this photo. So I was at Suzuka last year. It was pretty dope. Um, yeah, so sort of the big five stories is like one, Daniel Ricciardo. Helmut Marko has made it very clear that if Daniel doesn't start scoring points, he's gonna be out of the team. So I think that Daniel needs to like put up like eighth or better in the next two races, otherwise he might lose his seat. Now, another question, like if you've been following me this season, you know that I've been very, very bullish on Haas. I think that this is Haas's year. So yeah, the question is like, is Haas going to score? They've really overperformed the first three races. Is this going to continue? Is Carlos Sainz going to finish in the top three? Carlos Sainz won last week. He missed the week beforehand with appendicitis. Is he going to continue his form and like really prove to other teams that he deserves a seat? What's up with Mercedes? And then is Max going to win? This is always the question, right? Like when you have something like an engine failure, when you have something like a DNF, is like, is this car actually not as good as we thought it would? Well, as we thought it was. Is this the first signs that this team is imploding? So that'll be interesting to see. Will Max just come back and just destroy everybody, or is Ferrari actually as good as everyone thinks they are this year? So here are my predictions for this weekend. I'm gonna find a way to score this so that you guys can keep me honest. It's kind of hard. You can't specifically score correct placements because let's say I got this entire thing correct, but on the last lap Carlos Sainz DNF'd, then I would get the entire thing wrong. Versus let's say I just got Max 1 right and Lando 3 right and everything else wrong, then that would technically get more points than the other thing. But I think that, I think the first one's actually more impressive and more insightful than the second. So I'm gonna figure out a way to score this. Um, but here's kind of my predictions. I think the year is gonna be a fight between Max and Carlos, at least for a little bit until Max starts to pull away. I think that we see McLaren keep on um, taking leaps. Mercedes, I think George is just going to be a 4 or 5 consistent, um, and I think that Haas get eighth. I'm bullish on Haas. Hamilton, I think, starts dropping off this year. Lance gets 10th, Magnussen gets 11th. Daniel Rick, I think, is going to get 14th, 15th, 16th. I think Charles is going to DNF this week. I don't know. For some reason, I just kind of feel that in my bones. So, yeah, this is kind of what I think. And then we're going to touch base on this next week to see if I'm right. Media, 3 body problem. I just finished this. I highly recommend. I think it's really the ultimate EAC film. So first, I talked about this with my Oppenheimer review, and I'm gonna do a full review of this. But the scientists are the protagonists of this film. All of them, all of the good guys are scientists. And it really shows the weaponization of the doomer mentality because the entire plot of the show, and I don't want to give away too much, is basically an alien species is trying to demoralize our scientists as a way to conquer us. And one could make the argument that people are doing that by trying to make America decelerate. It also really shows the evils of communism. There's the struggle session scene that everyone's kind of been sharing, which I think is a really great scene. And then people that really forget how evil communism is. So having more of our media be kind of explicit about it, I think is a really positive thing. And then it kind of shows how doomers are misanthropes, how doomers really hate humanity. And I think that's also a really important thing because these people who, want us to decelerate, want us to lower our population, keep on going around and saying, I'm doing this for humanity. But I think it's really key to point out how these people don't like humanity. They don't like people. They're anti-people. And 3 Body Problem does this in a really good way. This is the struggle session that I was talking about. Yeah, so it's just overall great. I'm a huge fan. Highly recommend. All right, so here's my editorial for the week. So I went to Claude and I said, can you write me an argument in favor of effective accelerationism? And it said that, at its core, accelerationism seems to embrace violent revolution and social upheaval as a way to bring about radical change more quickly. I have an ethical issue with ideologies that could directly or indirectly lead to harm against others. So I think that, people have been posing effective accelerationism as this violent, crazy fringe group. And I think that's really incumbent upon us to fight against that. For starters, if they're actually I've said this before, I made a video about this, but if there actually are people in our movement who want to bring about the violent revolution and societal upheaval, please somebody tell me, because I would leave this movement in a heartbeat. I'm not joking. I really do not want to be in a movement that has a significant group of people that are advocating for that, because I'm advocating for the exact opposite. And I actually believe that the opposite group, the EACs and the D cells and the doomers, they're the ones who really want those types of things to happen, not us. So if I'm incorrect about that, please let me know, because I would leave the movement in a second. But like I think that like it's kind of key to just not allow people to kind of like lie and slander us in this way. And the best way to do that is to be an example. Um, you know, people like really want to be like around the types of people, like people are much more willing to listen to an argument if they want to be like the person who's making the argument. You know, if somebody's rich, if someone's successful, if someone has like a happy family, if someone is like, living an aspirational lifestyle, they're much more willing to listen to what you have to say. And so like I brought this up because like, this is like Mark Zuckerberg from 2010, looks like a nerd, like no one really wants to like, you know just socially awkward. Like no one kind of really wants to be like Mark Zuckerberg, even though he has all this money. In fact, it kind of shows like, oh, you can have all the money in the world, but you're still a dweeb, right? And then like Mark Zuckerberg this year got the sunglasses, got the cool jacket, and like he's just much more composed and much more of a person that people want to be like. And I think that like all of us who believe in accelerationism need to focus a lot more on being the type of people that other people want to be like, because they'll look at you, and you're building stuff, you're living healthy, you're living a good life, and they'll be like, oh, like, what's this? Yeah. um and yeah, like this, if you could kind of like look at the differences between the people, you really want people to see this as the choice. Like, which side do you want to be on? And I think that you really want people to look at this side, like, oh, these guys look pretty cool. I want to be on their side, not this side. I want to be on this side. So my own commitment. Over the past few years, I've really let my personal health slip a lot. For a wide variety of reasons, haven't really been going to the gym as much as I should have been, or really at all. I've been eating unhealthy. So my own personal commitment is that off of this idea, like I'm going to start, being healthy again. Today, I went on like a 3-hour hike in order to prepare myself for making this commitment. But yeah, every single week, I'm gonna weigh in on my commitment, how I'm trying to be better, how I'm trying to be a better person. And we haven't had anyone jump on the stream yet, but in case people watch it afterwards, please put in your comments like how you plan on, you know, being a better person. Like maybe it's getting a better job, maybe it's learning new skills, maybe it's being healthier, maybe it's being more confident, maybe it's being more kind and more generous to other people. Like whatever it is, like I'd love to hear it. And every week we can kind of keep ourselves accountable to be the best versions of ourselves. One, just to like self improvement by itself is good because you become a better person, but then also two, for people who want the world to accelerate, want people to build more, it makes it a lot more of an easier argument to make when people look at you and they say like, oh, this these people look pretty cool. Anyway, that's the end of my live stream. As I said, I'm going to be doing these once a week on Sundays for the time being, and then once I get like a larger audience, I'm gonna start doing these once a day. But that might be a while until I can like do this full time. We'd love to hear your thoughts, your comments, any ideas for how to improve this or change this. And until next week, talk to you then.